Keep pushing that boulder to the top of the hill. Welcome one and all to Suckville.
Extraordinary stories from ordinary humans? Yes, please. This is Live from Suckville. I'm your host, Silva Florence, an expat writer, cyclist, and podcaster currently laid up in Suckville after becoming suddenly unemployed. You know that thing life does? When you go left and it goes right, where you think in 5 years I will be this person with these things and I'll end up in this place. Oftentimes, though, it turns out completely different than we could have imagined. Many times better, because the truth is that our imaginations can be a bit limited. Additionally, it's hard for us to not feel like we're in control of our lives. To embrace unpredictability and uncertainty is a challenge. But what happens when we plunge into the great unknown? We give up a bit of control, maybe because we're forced to, even, like my guest today, Mark. The answer is that there is no answer. There is no way to know what will happen when we jump into the unknown. But that is part of the beautiful mystery of life. So are you ready? 1, 2, 3, jump. All right. Hello, everybody in Suckville. Today, my guest is Mark Martin, who was born and raised in Florida. Mark left Florida by joining the U.S. Navy. He arrived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 2000 and began hosting cyclists in 2010 with Warm Showers, a hospitality exchange organization. So, as you may or may not know, on Suckville, we like to talk about parts of people's lives that kind of sucked, but taught them a lot of things and contributed to who they are as a person. When we were chatting, we kind of decided on a part of your life that was, let's say, turbulent.
That works.
So you were, I believe, 19, you said, when it all started off.
So the war in Vietnam was still going. The draft was still going. And my number was not high, but it was high enough. Because of other pre-existing turmoil in my life, I didn't want to be where I was. And so in order to avoid the draft and undoubtedly going directly to Vietnam, I thought I'd join the Navy and avoid going to Vietnam, which didn't work out that way. But
why did you think joining the Navy would help you avoid going to Vietnam? I know nothing.
The Army is a land-based thing, and most of the fighting had been done in country on land. The Navy tended to stay on the water.
Makes sense.
I didn't realize that the Mekong River is water and that there was naval participation on the river.
Gotcha.
I went in as a nuke, the nuclear power side of things,
okay,
which was important enough to the Navy that chances were very good that I wouldn't go to be shot at, but wires get crossed, shit happens. I enlisted on my 19th birthday.
How long was it before you were sent to Vietnam?
2 years. I had to do all the training. I had to go through the academic and then the prototype training for the nuclear stuff. And then was in the Philippines waiting for the ship to come in. And that's when I got the surprise that I was going to Vietnam to a riverboat, which wasn't supposed to be happening, but it did.
Are you scared?
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, nobody sane wants to go to war.
No.
Some people became accustomed to it, and so they stayed in it. But I don't think anybody really wants to go to war. And I didn't enlist in some sense of duty to my country or some sort of, John Wayne God and Country hoorah thing. I enlisted so that I wouldn't go to war. My thinking was flawed as it was. So getting there was a surprise, a very unpleasant surprise.
Yeah.
I'd never been out of the country.
So just curious, but how long did you spend in Vietnam then?
I think it was around 6 months, which was another indication that I wasn't supposed to be there because it should have been a year. But eventually things got straightened out, and I got out, and then wound up going back in 75, just in time for Operation Eagle Pole.
What was that?
Oh, that was when, and so in 71 or 72, Nixon signed the peace accords, and there was a 3-year period that they called, I think they called it Vietnamization, so that they turned over the war to the South Vietnamese. And so in 75, I think it was May of 75, we left precipitously. There's a famous photograph of people trying to get aboard the last Huey out of Saigon from the rooftop of one of the buildings. And that day, in fact, I was on the Nuke, the surface ship. So I was in the engine room, which was my watch station, and I'm making water, which isn't to say that I was peeing into the bilge, but that I was actually making fresh water from salt water.
Okay.
And the intake pressure dropped precipitously. Not good. So I'm like, ah!
Now.
Yeah, it's definitely not a good thing. Went down, shifted the strainers, opened the old one, or the one I've been using, and pulled out the strainer, and it's got shells and sand and little crabs and seaweed in it. And I'm thinking, we draw 40 feet. Why is there sand in this?
Strange.
Yeah. So my shift ended, and I went up on deck, and I could have spit to shore. The Marine contingent, because it was a flagship, the Marine contingent was running around full combat stuff, asking, particularly remember one of them saying, does anybody speak Vietnamese? I'm like, it's a little late for that. And so there's this coastal steamer that was loaded with friendlies, including a whole bunch of ARVN, the South Vietnamese army people, who were quickly getting out of the uniform and throwing their weapons over the side. We had told that ship to go to a particular place, and the people on the ship were like, no, we're not going to do that.
Why not?
I suspect because we're going to send them to Cambodia, and that was not a particularly good thing to do, as we found out later. And so they wanted to stay in Vietnam, so they, commandeered the ship and took it where they wanted to go. And so in the wisdom of the United States government, they diverted this nuclear cruiser to move that cargo ship where we wanted it to go. And they almost ran her aground. So I'm like, this does not make any more sense than anything else that has happened here this whole time. It was a very much of a surprise to come up on deck, because the engine room has no windows. We're below the waterline. Come up on deck, and there are all these people running around trying to figure out, who speaks Vietnamese. Bright sunlight. There's this rusty hulk of a cargo ship about 20 feet away. So I'm like, what the hell is this? There was nothing I could do except, shake my head, and I didn't have any popcorn, but if I had, it would have been appropriate, because it was
like
just
a fly on the wall moment. Jesus.
Well, it was just like a combination Keystone Cop clusterfuck that was going on.
Is it like basically like being down in a windowless room underwater all the time? Was it strange?
Strange until you get used to it.
Yeah, I guess you use almost anything.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fairly large space, but it was jammed with, things you need to keep a ship moving, a warship.
Sure.
The main turbines were there, all that stuff, all the auxiliary equipment to keep them running.
How much time did you spend down there?
Oh, well, if we were lucky, 4 hours on, 8 hours off. If we weren't lucky, 4 and 4. And if we were even less lucky, 6 and 6.
Okay.
Depending on how many crew members we had. And sometimes we didn't have as many as we needed, so it would be an extended period.
Okay, I gotcha. This is all new to me. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it was new to me, too. I mean, I'd never done anything like that. And I have to hand it to the military that they could take a bunch of people who were civilians, not necessarily anarchists, but not accustomed to too much control.
Yeah.
And in a matter of weeks, getting us to the point where you obey an order and then question it, which has its drawbacks. But, it's amazing how effective that training is.
Were there any moments for you when you did obey an order and then question it later?
Eventually, the whole thing was questionable. I mean, I was of an age that I was too young to be in the peak of the hippie movement sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I had read a lot as a kid, and I had a philosophical bent, although the other things that had happened in my life that I was just at a loss to what to do, was free-floating. But being there in that situation, I had to pay attention to what was happening. And that just was like, whatever the policies of this country are, they make no sense. Like I say, the war was allegedly winding down, but it wasn't stopped. I mean, we were bombing Laos and Cambodia and doing all kinds of other just illegal shit. You've got this port city port cities are always different. And then you overlay a war on it, and, in chaos is opportunity, and there were plenty of opportunists. Thus, black market penicillin and some really nasty STDs.
Ew.
Yeah, it was one of those, gift that keeps on giving situations as a result of the war. And then, I mean, there's a combination of 3 odors that make me stop, and that's the smell of leaded gasoline, charcoal, and sewage.
Like even now?
Oh, yeah. I haven't been in a place where those 3 things happened simultaneously.
Thank God.
Yeah. I was in Mexico in the 80s and walking up a street, and those 3 smells hit me, and I had no idea where I was. I could have been in Vietnam again.
Smelling those smells like in Mexico that day, like, did it bring back any emotions or anything else besides just the confusion of not knowing where you were?
Well, that was part of not knowing where I was, because the other part was, oh my fucking God, am I in Vietnam again? I froze,
Yeah.
The scent, those odors together were so strongly associated with that period in Vietnam that it overrode everything. I think smells have a very, very strong memory component. It was just like getting hit in the head. It was scary. I mean, I was afraid, because I thought, being in a war like that, anybody could have come out of anywhere and, shot at me or thrown a bomb or whatever. Thankfully, I didn't have a complete break, but did look around and finally realized that, I was in Mexico, because it was Spanish, not Vietnamese, on the signs. And so it's like, okay, good.
I need a margarita. Give me a margarita right now.
Right. Mas tequila, por favor.
Exactly. Would you say that your experience over there changed you in any ways?
Oh, absolutely. I don't know that I had a sheltered life, but I was leading the life of a early teenager in the 1960s with middle class stuff. I mean, I didn't have to worry about anything. I was fed, I was clothed, I had a house, my parents were there, my brothers up to a point were there. There's such a major difference being in a third world country or whatever, we're not less developed country. I'm not sure what we're calling it these days.
I'm not either. Somebody will tell us.
I'm sure there will be comments. It's just an entirely different society, entirely different culture, an entirely different context.
Yep.
All of our lives are affected by the past. There's no question about that. It's been a colony that's been a European colony that's been trying to get their freedom for, at that point, 20 years. And then all the other things that were going on at that period, because there was all of our rhetoric here in this country about the domino effect, and if Vietnam goes, then Cambodia and Laos and Thailand will go, and then all of Southeast Asia will be communist, and then, we're all going to die, and some nuclear holocaust brought on by the dirty communists,
Some of that is starting to sound a little bit too familiar. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it still works. I mean, they're still talking about, communists.
Fear works pretty well.
So fear sadly, it's a terrific motivator for humans. Love, not so much, sadly.
There's some of us out there that are a bit more motivated by love than fear. You have to become conscious first that you're letting fear lead you, right?
Right. And you have to be, as you say, aware and be willing to stand up to looking at the things that are driving you.
Exactly.
And that's not easy. It's a lot easier to just ignore it, and it'll go away. Or it won't go away, but it won't be in the forefront of your mind. And so it gets to keep living and driving. I see that here because all the news is constantly pumping fear into people.
For a while now.
Well, I mean, it makes people want to be whatever constitutes safe.
Very true.
And they're willing to let other people tell them what that means. Instead of saying, wait a minute, why do you keep telling me to be afraid?
The world does have dangers, and there are dangerous people in the world, but all these people told me I was completely insane for riding my bike alone across the United States, as a single woman. If I were a colored woman, a trans woman, I would have had to think 3 or 4 times instead of just twice. But unfortunately, I want to say that as well. But the point is that to some degree, the power that fear has in our lives depends on us.
Yeah, and it's much like people tell me that even now, you can't ride your bike in Baton Rouge. I'm like, well, I've got a bike with 38,000 plus miles on it, done in Baton Rouge, with me on it. So, what you mean by that?
So there.
Yeah, so one of the effects of this thing about Vietnam, too, was that it got me to the point, well, first, it didn't completely break the training I had received as part of the culture. I mean, nobody sat down. Well, church was definitely a sit down and train people. It's just part of the background, but you absorb it. Humans absorb that stuff. I mean, every person who grows up in a country, no matter what country, receives training on their country. Very few countries talk about themselves as being a shithole, but lots of countries, particularly in the United States, talk about, we're going to save the world, the shining city on the hill, and blah, 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 blah. So part of what happened was that a lot of that training got roughed up and eventually broken because of what I saw with years in the Navy.
Did you feel pretty disillusioned with the United States at that point, or how did it make you feel about the U.S.?
Absolutely. I mean, it's also because I was already thinking along those lines when I got back to the United States, much less when I was discharged. It was a very different culture in that if you were in the military in the United States during and shortly after Vietnam, people weren't saying thank you for your service. They were spitting and saying, baby killers and all that stuff. That
had to have been incredibly difficult to come back from a war situation and then have people treating you like that. And it's not your fault.
Yeah, I mean, it's also given the context of the period of the era where it was all God and country and, clean up America, get a haircut, and, forget this peace, love, dope stuff. Let's move on. And then if you were inclined to have gone in to fulfill that training in, serving God and country, and then you come back and your country is treating you like shit because you had done that, which you were supposed to do.
Right.
Then it's like, what, more dissonance. For me, it was not pleasant at all, but I kind of understood what they were talking about, even though they were speaking mostly out of ignorance, because, again, propaganda for a particular side, which we're really seeing now.
Yeah, it's always that way, I have a feeling.
Yeah, I don't think, you can go back to, ancient Egypt, Ramses II, this huge propaganda thing literally written in stone of him overcoming the enemy in this particular war, which he lost, actually. But at home,
must have been easy when there was no internet,
it was a lot easier when you don't have instant access to everything. That was another thing too. Before computers saturated the world, much less cell phones. There was a whole different way of seeing the world because, for one thing, it wasn't instantaneous. If something happened in Afghanistan in the 60s, you may or may not have heard about it. That's one of the reasons I think Afghanistan and Iraq and all the Middle East crap kept going on, was people just didn't know it was happening, didn't want to know. It's willing acceptance of whatever things are without questioning what's going on.
I think when we start to question, well, is this right? Should America or whatever country, America, since we're talking about America, be doing this? Then you have to kind of own the fact that you're a part of it, Yeah,
well, and it's disruptive.
It is.
It's a lot easier to deal with food, shelter, clothing, entertainment, rather than looking at, why do I even want this stuff? Why am I commuting 45 minutes through 3 parishes between home and work? And I hate it, but I do it. Why am I doing that? Nobody goes that far. It's just like, oh, the traffic is so bad. Why don't all these other people get off the road? Well,
It's so true.
They want you to get off. You want them to get off, and everybody stays right where they are.
That's true. So what happened when you got back from Vietnam? What did you do?
When I signed up for a nuke, we were promised a at the time, hefty financial bonus, because we had to sign up for 6 years instead of 4. And then at some point, the government unilaterally changed all those contracts and reduced the amount of money without any discussion. So a class action lawsuit started and was eventually won, so that when I was discharged, I got a chunk of money. There is no equivalent of like a reverse boot camp. They don't deprogram you to become a civilian again. So one day you're in the military and the next day you're not. But I bought an old school bus and converted it to live in. I was discharged from San Francisco, basically, the base that's not there anymore. And drove down to San Diego, saw a couple of shipmates who were still in, and then wound up meeting a Swiss guy who was traveling the country. And I was like, well, I'm going to Florida in this bus. You want to come along? And he's like, sure. I didn't find out until the day he first decided to drive the bus that he had only ridden a motorcycle. How
did that go down?
Well, the first time we had to turn onto the interstate, it was quite a surprise. So it was like, whoa, you may want to slow down there, buddy. But then I got back to St. Pete in Florida, where I grew up. And of course, being gone for 6.5, 7 years, particularly because I went in when I was 19 and I came out when I was 25. So all of the people and my friends and everything were also 19 to 25, but their lives had done what everybody's life does in that period, which is extremely formative, and quite literally in that our prefrontal lobes finally get settled. All that stuff, when you're making that transition from being a kid to being a quasi-adult.
Was it hard to find like things in common with people then? Did you just feel like you were kind of on your own?
Oh, absolutely. What do you talk about? So what have you done for the last 6 years? Well, I learned how to operate a nuclear power plant. I learned about sex, drugs, and rock and roll in a naval port. You? I dated, I got married, and I have a kid. Oh, okay.
Damn, that's crazy.
Well, I think everybody faces that. I mean, I remember hosting a really interesting couple from Austria. In the summer, they worked in Svalbard. It's an archipelago up in the Arctic. So they do this like ecotourism in the summer, and in the winter, they would bicycle tour around the world.
That's like what I want my life to look like.
I know. It's like, why didn't I think of this when I was in my 20s?
No kidding.
They've been doing it for 10 years. The woman had noticed that all of their friends, their lives were diverging because of their experiences. It was similar but different in my context than what we're talking about, that suddenly being out of the military, being back in the civilian life, having been out of it for 6 years, things happen and they slip. There's a lot of slip involved between those two worlds. I mean, popular music, you go out for a year and come back in, everything's different.
How bizarre.
And again, without having any reverse boot camp to reintegrate into society, you got to pick that up along the way. So that takes another period of time to reduce that slip.
How long before you kind of felt like you were, quote, reintegrated?
Maybe 3 years.
Wow.
Because there was a lot of other stuff going on. I mean, I started coming out as gay when I was in the Navy, which was an entirely different thing from doing anything today. It was still just illegal at the time.
That is insane, by the way.
Insane?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Incredibly brave of you then. I mean, like, even more than normal brave.
Well, I wasn't waving a rainbow flag. Well, for one thing, there wasn't any rainbow flag.
That does not go with the Army apparel. Or sorry, Navy.
No, it does not. No, they would have caught on to that quickly. But I had a boyfriend, one of my shipmates, which was on a ship of only 180 people. It's not exactly a secret. But when I got out of the Navy and then continued to come out and announce myself as gay, I found that culture, which was a lot of fun in the sex, drugs, and dope sort of thing, but it was not fulfilling at all.
How come?
Well, sex is wonderful, can be, but if that's the only thing you're doing, you're not really building any connections with people, except on a, let's have sex. Eventually, it's just not, it becomes apparent that there's something missing, right? Something more fundamental. And at the context of that time, there were, it's less common now, but there were gay bars specifically. Now that's less so, I think.
I know, like, when I go to Denver and I hang out with my gay uncles, we hit every gay bar that there is. They know all the bartenders.
Yeah, and I think, too, that depending on the city, it's more likely where there had been a gay ghetto that was strong and there were a lot of gay people living there, that culture was still very much part of it. A place like Baton Rouge, no. So now most of the bars around here are mixed.
Okay. Okay.
Which is fine. I think that's the way it should be. I think, who cares?
Exactly.
And we can all get along. That's good,
Amen. When you were coming out though, like on this ship in the Navy, were your other compatriots, were they supportive? Or how did they react?
The background culture was very different. Not only in the sense it was the military, but the the overall culture regarding homosexuality, which is the way it was referred to. I think Stonewall had happened in 1969, but there was still, it was going to be another 5 years till 1982, 1983, with the advent of HIV/AIDS and all the protests, that things really began to change, and initially not for the better. The shipmates weren't supportive because being out didn't mean the same thing, but they weren't being nasty.
That's good.
Okay. It was basically a neutral thing, and people kind of supported, but not. I mean, it was a ship with 180 people on it, 180 men.
That's a lot of people.
Well, it is, but you think aircraft carriers have 7,000. And so
holy shit.
180 people it's a self-contained village, with the emphasis on village. If you were so inclined, you could know everybody. You may not know them well, but you know them. Especially when you've got a living conditions like we were in. There was very little that wasn't noticed.
What were the living conditions like? Very close quarters, I imagine, or?
Oh, engineering berthing where I was a space that was, gosh, I don't know, 30 feet by 45 feet.
Mm-hmm. Pretty small.
There were 60 people living there.
Wow.
So the racks were 3 high, and there's no walls, no bulkheads, no curtains. So whatever you were doing.
It's like a beehive.
Living in a room with 50 other people. Yeah, I mean, so there wasn't any real opposition. I mean, now out in the civilian world, it was very different. There was people who were and still are nasty, and who are opposed to anything that's not cisgendered, heterosexual, Christian life, even if what you're doing is a lie, because there's plenty of people who still maintain the illusion by getting married, even though they have no interest sexually in their partner.
Yeah.
Sadly, we'd be a lot better off if everybody just accepted what was going on and stopped, twisting people up.
Yeah. Could be themselves and accept everybody else for who they are. If it's not hurting you and it's not hurting me, then what's wrong with it?
Yeah, but I think it's also based on accepting oneself.
Certainly.
But I think most people don't grow up hearing first love yourself.
Why don't we hear that in our society? What do you think?
I don't know. For such a Christian-centered group of people, that's not what they teach. People don't spend all their time preaching the Sermon on the Mount, from which love yourself and then love your neighbor. But they sure spend a lot of time with God, the Almighty Stomper. And I think that's part of that thing about control and using fear.
Yeah, religion is one of those things that I think it's used for a lot of things that it shouldn't be used for. Because I have some good friends and my amazing dad, who's definitely listening, who are Christians, but they don't shove it down anyone's throat, and they're embodiments of love. So that's what it's all about.
Exactly right.
What would the Book of Martin say?
Oh, pretty much. I mean, I've spent a lot of time looking at various belief systems. They all have things in common.
Sure.
When it comes to interhuman relationships. Basically it's like, don't be a dick.
Pretty much.
Love yourself. Pay attention. Be nice. If you see somebody needs something, if you can provide it, provide it. Don't sneer at them or talk down to them or anything else, Because we're all in the same place. And just because right now you don't have a need doesn't mean you're not going to need something. It's not really difficult.
I think it's a perfect way to end with the Book of Martin, though.
Right. Well, good. Hey, kids, don't be a dick. Just be nice.
Amen. You say, A. Martin.
Let's not take this too far.
I'm so happy we chatted.
Thank you for doing this. I look forward to hearing what comes out of it.
So before you go, I'm going to let you guys in on a little secret, which is that before and after the show, I usually bullshit a bit with my guests. And Mark and I met each other when I was riding my bicycle across the country. He hosted me. So we have a very good, easy rapport. And at this point in our conversation, we were talking about him coming to Europe and me hosting him. So without further ado, here you go.
We'll keep in touch.
You'll be welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I look forward to farting in your living room.
I can't wait.
Oh, good. We'll.
That's fine. You can fart in my living room. I'm down.
Cool.
And that's definitely where we're going to end.
Make sure you don't miss an episode by signing up for the Suckville email community. Just go to livefromsuckville.godaddysites.com. On that same handy page, you can leave me a voice message using SpeakPipe to answer any questions from the show, leave feedback, or thank someone. A special thanks to all my guests and to Chris Kirby for the amazing theme music. This episode was recorded in my kitchen and produced by yours truly. Until next time!